Well, thank you for being here for our event titled Staying Woke, the Case for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Why It Matters. My name is Phil Dalton. I'm the director of the Center for Civic Engagement and a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy here at Hofstra. This is the Center for Civic Engagement's 18th year. Our mission is to offer educational, co-curricular, and cultural programs and activities that foster an awareness of local, national, and global issues, encouraging students to be active citizens and contributors to their local, national, and global communities. We're supported by over 30 faculty and administrators who make up our advisory board, 16 undergraduate fellows who learn by working alongside community partners here on Long Island, and 2 graduate students who help make everything possible. And if you wish to learn more, there are newly printed cards at the back table. If you'd like to, look up becoming a fellow with the center, or pass it along to somebody who you think would be a good candidate, please consider doing so. The Day of Dialogue here at Hofstra was begun by retired sociology professor Cindy Bogard. The day exists as a way to get students and the community talking and listening to one another about issues of the day. And some people are good at talking. Some are less confident doing so. Far fewer are good at listening. And that's really at the core of what the day is about, providing opportunities for different voices to be expressed and for us to give careful consideration to what we hear. And if we do it right, you'll hear things you'll disagree with today. Proceeding from the assumption, however, that other people are our equals, we will hear them out, and we listen and we learn. I say this for all the events. This has nothing to do with DEI.
Love that.
Before we begin, I'd like to say a few words of thanks, though. First, to the Cultural Center, specifically to Athleen Collins, Carol Mallison, and Janine Rinaldi. And without their effort and their expertise, we could not put these events together. The Center for Civic Engagement's undergraduate fellows and our graduate assistants, Alexa Sauter and Eliza Ortega, they helped put these events together as well. And little of what we do would be possible also without the support of the provost, Charlie Reardon. Now, to begin this morning's event, I'd like to introduce Dr. Aisha Carter-Wilson, Hofstra University's Executive Director for Equity and Inclusion, and she will introduce the panelists and act as moderator for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. So, as you said, I'm Aisha Wilson-Carter. Thank you to Phil and your team at CCE, as well as the Hofstra University Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and Mario Murillo, who definitely was my partner. And this conversation was really a brainchild and what we've been talking about and discussing a lot on that DEI committee. So thank you all for being here. So this panel is really basically discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion, why it matters, and the importance of staying woke, using that language, even though it has become controversial for some reason. So across the country, state lawmakers are proposing bills to limit diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at public universities and schools and in the private sector, too, when they can. These bills can impact a wide range of initiatives, from defunding DEI offices and officers to removing diversity statements from hiring practices, and initiatives that really get at the sense of belonging for both students, faculty, and staff. So nearly half of the states in the U.S. have either introduced or are in the process of drafting such legislation. This panel is going to focus on the growing national backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and why proponents actively trying to make a positive impact must really address both the valid and invalid and baseless criticism. So I'm just going to start because I think a lot of times when we hear those words, DEIB, we're not really sure what they mean. So I just want to start with a brief definition. Diversity is a representation of individuals with different identities and lived experiences within a community. Equity is ensuring individuals are equipped to succeed by providing access and opportunities and resources based on needs. Inclusion is achieved when individuals and their contributions are appreciated and valued. And belonging is the feeling of security and support when one has a sense of community and acceptance. And so I'm going to now tell you a little bit about our panelists, which I am super excited that we are all here today. These panelists are great. You'll hear a little bit about them. So first, we have Eric Lopez. He's a seasoned leader with nearly 2 decades of experience in research, advocacy, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. His current role is the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Governance, Programs, and Enterprise Priorities at Comcast. He leads efforts to address DEI-related issues, engage enterprise stakeholders, and drive strategic priorities that further Comcast, NBC, Universal, Telemundo's commitment to fostering inclusive and equitable environments. He is a Fulbright Research Grant recipient who earned both his bachelor's and master's degree right here at Hofstra University. His Fulbright research in Hungary focused on the discrimination of the Roma in public education and explored the parallels between post-Brown versus Board of Education policies in the U.S. He serves on the National Fulbright Association Board of Directors, as well as the board of Blossom Projects, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering and underserved communities in India. Eric is deeply committed to advancing DEI initiatives in the corporate and nonprofit sectors. His work ensures that the voices of diverse stakeholders are heard, and he continues to leverage data and research to promote equitable opportunities for underrepresented populations. Thank you, Eric. So we also have Tanya Martinez Galanucci. She is the Executive Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the New York City Bar Association. Tanya is a first-generation professional, mother of 2, and a breaker of generational curses. Her DEIB philosophy is rooted in building community to create psychological safety so that everyone gets the opportunity to be their authentic selves. Prior to joining her current role, Tanya was a New York City public school teacher in the Bronx and Washington Heights, and later a litigation associate at Clearly Gotten About. Both sets of experience have deeply informed Tanya's DEIB practice. Thank you, Tanya. And Charmel Christie, who's our current Dean of Students here at Hofstra University, has a 16-year journey in higher education, which has been a labor of love, marked by a commitment to student success and evolving understanding of their needs. Throughout her tenure, Charmel has been passionately advocated for inclusivity, student engagement, and academic brilliance, shaping the landscape of higher education. Her steadfast commitment to nurturing talent and fostering supportive learning environments has left a mark on the educational journeys of countless students. She's now serving as the Dean of Students, and she continues to harness her wealth of experience to spark positive transformations and uplift future generations. Thank you, Charmel.
You're welcome.
So I just want to start with you all giving some opening remarks and really thinking about what does DEIB mean in your professional spaces? Eric?
Thank you, Aisha. I've already scheduled some time for you to talk to my boss about all the great things that I do. No, thank you so much, Aisha, and everyone who played a role in creating the space for us to talk today. And for all the administrators and faculty that invited me to speak. Very, very honored to be here. So as Aisha said, Eric Lopez, Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Comcast NBC Universal. However, I will say that all comments and statements are my own, and I'm speaking on my own behalf. I just have to say that. And so I can speak freely about these issues and what I think about them. And so how do I view my role at Comcast or at any other organization with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion is mostly as a coach and a sort of like a health partner. And you're going to hear me say a lot of things about health, and I'm going to or speak about parallels about how diversity, equity, inclusion is sort of like how I would think about a health practitioner talking to a patient about how to improve their well-being. But in this case, and with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion, is about the well-being of the culture of the space that you're working in and the stakeholders that participate and engage in that space. So that's primarily how I think about it. My journey there has been, as Aisha mentioned, through many years working in the nonprofit space at first, starting here in New York City, working at the Neighborhood Defender Service in Harlem, and then working my way into Washington, D.C. eventually, through the nonprofit circuit there, and then eventually now into the corporate space as a practitioner in the DEI space there. And to put it lightly, I think that DEI over the last 2 to 3 years has gone through some shifts and changes that are significant in many ways. And as a practitioner in this space, I think that it has challenged us not only to fight back against folks who obviously see this space and this work as threats to themselves, and for a variety of reasons, some uncalled for and some misguided, while others have given us pause to sort of step back and think about how we're doing our work and how we can make improvements. And also it has challenged us to think about how we evolve this work and how we move on to the next steps and how do we ensure sustainability for the work, because that's a really important thing. It's not just about just doing something to check a box. It's about doing something to get outcomes and keep those outcomes for the long haul. So that's how I see my work in this space, is sort of how to guide organizations and leaders to think about these things and how to implement practices that will help them achieve their goals in these spaces.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for your amazing introduction. And I'm just going to add a little bit more color to what Aisha already said. So you know that I was a teacher, you know that I am a lawyer, and I practiced in big law for 6 years before coming to this role at the New York City Bar. And so I want to give you a little bit more context behind that. I'm first generation everything. First to be born in this country, to speak English, to graduate from high school, college, and beyond, right? When you are the first, it means that you have to find a way or make one in many instances. The other piece that you may not know, especially from the introduction, is that I am Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican. I was born in New York City and raised. I grew up in the projects that face Lincoln Center. So from the moment I became a conscious being, I was aware of the haves and the have-nots and where I fell on that spectrum. So when I say DEI is my birthright, trust and believe I mean it, okay? For my ancestors, for my present, for my tomorrow, this is why I do DEI. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about DEI within the legal profession and beyond, because there's a real important reason why I stopped practicing as a litigator and instead focused my attention on doing DEI facing the very industry, facing the legal industry, to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, right? So one thing I want to talk about is my definition, or not mine, I didn't create it, but the working definition I use of DEI, and it is based on a definition that was put out there by Lily Zhang. And if you have not read their book, DEI Deconstructed, I highly recommend it. It is a great how-to 101 DEI, what it is, what it isn't, and it gives you a really good background of how we got where we are today. But just so we're all on the same page, DEI is a multidisciplinary framework. It uses the knowledge, data, and information from various disciplines to better understand our environment, our context, right? DEI measures its outcomes based on how well people are doing, to Eric's points. Do people feel financially secure? Do they feel safe? Can they speak their mind? Can they be free? Right? DEI done well creates environments and systems and organizations and teams that feel respected, representative, right? So that's what DEI is. Because I know DEI is used in lots of weird and interesting ways, especially pejoratives, as if it's one tangible thing, like, here's DEI, you can go buy it. No, it is context specific. The disciplines that need to be used and thought about are always going to be context specific. What's DEI in one place cannot just be copied and pasted and brought somewhere else. We must understand what we're trying to do and how we got there before we ever think about any solutions, right? So that's one thing. The second piece I want to bring up is I went into law because I thought the law was a way to bring equity and justice and fairness into the world. And I already told you why I exist, right? I know my purpose. I know why I'm here, right? And it was very quick upon entering law school that I realized, oh, wait, this is not the way I'm going to be able to do that. And the reason why I say that is because the legal industry is so far behind almost every other industry when it comes to DEI. And if you ever engage in legal education or understand how law came to be, it's very clear why that is, right? It is very rooted in a legacy of a historical narrative that is not inclusive, that does not use all the various disciplines I just mentioned to allow us to better understand what we're doing. And I just saw this phrase on Instagram recently, so forgive me because I'm going to butcher it, but it captures how I feel about the legal industry telling me about equality and justice. And it's this idea that I'm not going to trust you to tell me about my present and where I am today if I can't even trust you to tell me about my history. And so remember that, right? These systems are old. They have not been updated in a really long time. And the very people who could bring the knowledge into the room about how to make it better have been systematically excluded historically and presently. And this is very much why I switched my focus from being a lawyer to lawyering lawyers. So that's my take on DEI as a profession. And I think I just wanted to make one other point, just tying it into everything I just shared. You know, if you look at when DEI started or what we call the DEI industry, again, being the DEI practitioner I am, context specific, right? If you're thinking about America, and you'll read this in the Li Zhang's book, there's evidence of the prototypical features of what we now call the DEI industry as early as the 1920s. In these encounter groups where people were trying to bring in folks from different racial groups to come together and learn about each other. So we can understand some of those efforts to have led to what we today call the DEI industry in America. However, I just want to highlight that DEI is beyond that. It's the way that we're understanding it, and we're but only humans, and we use the words that we have and the concepts that we have to create it. But I want to emphasize that DEI really reflects the very human and natural desire to be treated equally and to be respected. And that will exist always, and it has always existed as long as humans existed. And so DEI, no matter what people call it or try to do, will always exist because the human spirit will always endure and will always want to belong. So that's my piece.
Thank you.
Don't judge me. I'm not a long talker, so I apologize. I like to summarize things. My name is Shamel Christie. I am the Dean of Students here. And if you haven't noticed, I'm unapologetically Black. And so I walk in spaces Black, right, because I can't change that I'm Black. I also unapologetically walk in spaces loud. I am the loud dean here. And so I compliment Zaibis Munoz, who is my boss in the back, but also Jessica Easy, because they hired a Black loud woman, which means that they told me to break down barriers, break down walls. So it is my job here at Hofstra to remind my students that are marginalized that they matter. And if their voice is not amplified, they tap me in so that I can amplify it, right? So that's my primary job. Every day I walk into spaces to remind folks who my students are, who they represent. And when they don't have that definition or that knowledge, they say, Dean Christie, can you help me? I sure can. My primary focus is to make sure that my students feel this sense of belonging, break down barriers that's preventing them from feeling like that, right? Because they do pay to be here, but they also want to feel valued. They want to be respected. And when they feel like someone is disrespecting them, then they call Dean Christie. And so all this panel, you're going to hear me talk with passion, but some folks like to put me in a box and say aggression, and that is okay. But when I speak today, understand I am only coming from the lens of a Black, loud, proud woman, because Hofstra said that I belong here, and so I'm gonna remind my students that they belong here.
Thank you. Thank you all for those amazing opening remarks. I think it's clear why you're all the panelists here today. So, and I do thank you because you all touched on some of what we're going to talk about today and from your specific lens. So, yeah, just kind of following up on what Tanya said, DEI, you can go back to the 1920s, but we also know that DEI is also rooted in a lot of the anti-discrimination laws from the civil rights movement, right, back in the 50s and 60s. And also, when it comes to higher ed, a lot of the accreditation standards also are rooted in DEI. And so by using the data, the policy, and the interventions, DEI advocates really say that we're trying to address discrimination along racial, gender, ability status, and it is a full spectrum. So I'm really happy you said that DEI is not this one-size-fits-all, depending on the industry and how you're talking about it and where you're talking about it. So supporters and DEI practitioners argue that DEI forces a more inclusive environment, right? Whether that be in the private sector, on a college campus, or in a K through 12 school setting, right? Where everyone kind of gets this sense of belonging and has the tools that they need to succeed. And that it is still very much still needed to counter and overcome the effects of decades-long exclusionary practices that have put people from certain demographic groups at a disadvantage. So on the other hand, and again, we're just, kind of setting up the foundation of where we are as far as DEIB is concerned right now. On the other hand, a lot of critics, and some of them have been conservative lawmakers, and that's why I think this issue is really important to the election, not just at the presidency, but all the way down ballot. They have succeeded in quashing a lot of DEI initiatives and efforts in 14 states. They went on an all-out assault on colleges specifically as far as DEIB efforts in 2023, and we know that they've made a lot of progress. They often, their point of view and perspective is that these programs give an unfair advantage, right, to minority students or students who might come from historically marginalized backgrounds, that we are violating free speech by, by kind of coming in and stepping in when depending on the speech and the practices that are going on. And that generally they might be, they're saying that they are a waste of money and taxpayer money specifically for their public schools. So a lot of us as DEI professionals wonder really how much these efforts are going to cost us and what the consequences of these efforts might be, right? So anywhere from job losses to financial setbacks to the lack of diversity within corporations and college campuses and K through 12 schools, right, everywhere. So we know that they've come for affirmative action under this lens as well. They've come from identity-based hiring and admission practices, right? They've come for the diversity training programs. And specifically about the diversity training programs, they're under fire, right, from criticism, some saying that they are ineffective, some saying that there is some valid criticism that they're sometimes poorly executed by the practitioners, right? But however, a lot of DEI offices are also tasked with responding to complaints about gender, about pay inequity, right? About family leave, but disability discrimination, sexual harassment, right? All of these things fall under that DEIB umbrella when you look at it and start to really break it up as far as the initiatives are concerned. So when it comes to both this valid and kind of invalid criticism and the industry, right, for DEIB practitioners, what's so scary about DEIB, right? what are some of the critiques that you heard that you have to deal with when it comes to the trainings, the diversity of thought, perspective, initiatives, right? And what's your perspective on these criticism? What do you think? Why is it so scary for so many?
So, excuse me. I think it's so funny that we as practitioners, and just to hear you say that, these initiatives that we pour our hearts into are ineffective. And I'm going to go back to the medical analogy. It's like, you go to a medical practitioner and they tell you, you should probably stop smoking because it's having some negative effects on you. You don't. And then you're being blamed for the negative consequences of that. And, I just feel like it's very unfortunate. I feel like a lot of the criticism that has come out over the last 1 or 2 years